Seema had 3 children, but her husband's brutality didn't end. He didn't treat her like a human, he tore her apart. One day, he knocked on the door and yelled. When she screamed, he gagged her with a cloth. That night, at 11 p.m., Seema, drenched in blood-soaked clothes, ran away from home. Everyone around said, "He's a boy, nothing will happen to him. Your honor will be lost." But what honor was left for Seema? That day, she decided that enough was enough. She believed that if someone has the courage, self-confidence, and passion, they can reach the heights they deserve. Seema also had the desire to move forward, but her life was filled with countless hardships, so many that anyone who heard them might find a bit of courage within themselves to be motivated and reach their own goals. There was a time when Seema longed for even a single rupee. There were times when she went to bed hungry, hoping to find food or a rupee from somewhere. Come, let's know the full story of Seema.
Seema, who came from a small town of Uttar Pradesh, a district of India, popular for the Taj Mahal. She belonged to a very middle-class family. She was good at studies from a young age and dreamed of becoming a doctor. She was never second in her class, and when the 12th grade results were announced, she ranked well. All of Seema's friends began pursuing their dreams, moving to different places. When it was Seema's turn, she expressed to her father that she wanted to become a doctor, but her father refused. He believed that no girl from their family had ever gone outside, fearing that if a girl left, she would be ruined. This belief shattered Seema's dream. Even her school principal asked her what she planned to do next. When Seema explained that her father wasn't allowing her to go out, the principal personally came to her house to talk to her father. However, her father remained firm in his decision. In Seema's community, the norm was to marry off a girl once she finished her 12th grade. And so, at the age of 19, Seema was married off. The man she married turned out to be anything but what she had expected. Seema thought he was educated and understood the value of education, but reality hit her hard when she discovered that her husband was an 8th grade dropout. When Seema expressed her desire to continue studying, he dismissed her, saying, "What will you do with education? A woman's job is to take care of the house, cook, and clean, nothing more." Her husband married her only for her body, something she was unaware of at the time. At 19, a girl who loved studying found herself trapped in the hands of a man who was far from human. The very thought of marriage terrified her. Seema's life after marriage turned into a nightmare. Every day, she faced violence and was treated harshly. It didn't feel like she was his wife. It felt like she was merely a body he had obtained, a body he knew how to tear apart and nothing more. He didn't care about anything else. Because of his brutality, Seema began to lose hope. She even spoke to her in-laws, telling them that she had been deceived and that her husband was not the right person. He was an alcoholic, a drug addict, and engaged in all sorts of bad activities. He would beat her, and the days turned into years, filled with endless suffering. In the early days, Seema thought maybe she was just not understanding what marriage was, and that's why these things were happening to her. But as time passed, she realized the extent of his cruelty. Seema had a passion for studying, so she requested him to let her continue her education. He agreed, but only on the condition that she would do whatever he asked her to do when she returned. Seema accepted, hoping that if she could study and make something of herself, her circumstances might improve. She enrolled in college with whatever money she could scrape together. However, attending college became a challenge as her husband controlled everything. In her town, no one cared about education. When Seema left the house, she was called all sorts of derogatory names. When she returned home, she faced the same abuse. She managed to study while also doing all the household chores, but her husband's constant abuse weakened her so much that she failed her first year. It was the first time she had ever failed, but she didn't give up. She continued her studies, determined to succeed. Despite her determination, Seema faced severe financial challenges. When she asked her family for money, they refused. Her husband also refused, having no interest in her education. All he cared about was her body, which left Seema feeling like she was dying every day. Nevertheless, she decided to take up a private job. Despite the opposition from her in-laws and the gossip from others, she started working in a private company. Whatever little money she earned, she used to pay her college fees, sometimes borrowing from friends to make ends meet. Eventually, Seema completed her graduation, but instead of relief, her troubles only grew. Her husband's abuse intensified, and he would steal the money she earned, using it to buy alcohol and drugs. Her life became a living hell, worse than before. If she refused to give him money, he would beat her severely, leaving marks on her body that would forever remind her of his cruelty. Seema's family suggested that perhaps the abuse was because they didn't have children yet. But they didn't know that Seema had been pregnant multiple times, only to have her pregnancies forcibly terminated due to his violence. She was forbidden from telling anyone about it, and he threatened to kill her if she did. Seema lived in constant fear, trapped with a monster who showed no mercy. Inside, she was breaking, but she continued to fight on. Seema's situation grew worse after she spoke to her in-laws and other women in the family. They told her that because she didn't have children, she wasn't being given any responsibility. They assured her that everything would be fine once she had kids. But from the moment she conceived, her husband stopped paying attention to her. Seema began to feel that he didn't even believe the children were his. Throughout the 9 months of pregnancy, her husband never once took her to the hospital. Seema was carrying twins, but that didn't stop him from trying to assert control over her after 3 months. When she resisted, he hurt her so badly that it attracted the attention of the entire neighborhood. Whenever Seema tried to talk to her mother-in-law, sister-in-law, or her husband's elder brother's wife, they would say, "He's a man, what else will he do?" This left Seema terrified, questioning what marriage was supposed to be. If marriage was like this, she thought, then no one should get married. Even when her children were 6 months old, her husband continued to mistreat her. When she refused to comply with his demands, he acted violently. The situation became so severe that it endangered the lives of both Seema and her unborn twins. The entire neighborhood gathered that night as Seema struggled, feeling completely helpless. Her husband was not just physically abusive towards her, but also destructive in their home, breaking everything in sight. The shame this brought upon Seema made her wish for an escape from her life. One day, in a fit of desperation, her husband threatened to harm himself, manipulating Seema with the intention of blaming her if anything happened. Though his family intervened, the situation would calm down for only about 10 days before his abuse resumed. Seema's children were born through a cesarean section due to the injuries she sustained from his beatings. Despite this, her husband never showed any concern. She was brought home just 2 days after the surgery, in such a weak state that she could barely stand. Blood was everywhere, and she had no one to care for her. Seema's life had become a living hell. When her twins were only 4 months old, Seema began to experience her husband's cruelty again. Despite having just recovered from surgery, he continued his abusive behavior. This led to severe complications, and Seema had to undergo another surgery. She was so weak that she could barely care for her children. Whenever she asked for money for milk, she was met with hostility. Her husband would mock her, saying that he had never wanted the children in the first place. With her children crying from hunger and no money for milk, Seema decided she couldn't watch her babies suffer. She pleaded with her husband to at least work for their sake, but he ignored her. Left with no other option, Seema took a job at a private company to provide for her children. She was weak and struggling to recover from her surgeries, but she had no choice. Every day, she went to work, took care of her children, did the housework, and endured her husband's mistreatment at night. The cycle of violence and hardship left Seema exhausted, and she even contemplated ending her life. One day, overwhelmed with despair, Seema locked herself in a room with her children, intending to take her own life. But as soon as she placed the noose around her neck, her children began to cry. At that moment, Seema realized that if she died, no one would be there to care for her babies. Determined to live for them, Seema resolved to survive and provide for her children, no matter what. She began working tirelessly, taking on small jobs that paid only a few thousand rupees. Despite having no experience or special skills, Seema worked hard to support her children. However, her husband continued to steal her money and mistreat her, adding to her burdens. Seema's in-laws were no help, and she found herself alone in her struggles. As time passed, Seema became pregnant with her second daughter. She knew that her husband would not care for this child either and tried desperately to terminate the pregnancy. But her husband and his family refused to support her, leaving Seema to face yet another difficult childbirth. She returned to work just 3 months after giving birth, leaving her newborn daughter at home. This cycle of abuse and hardship continued for 10 years. Seema tried to move away, renting a separate room, but her husband would always find a way to threaten and control her. She couldn't leave her children behind, so she decided to take a job in another city, hoping that the distance might help her escape his clutches. However, even in the new city, Seema couldn't escape her husband's behavior. One night, after returning from work, she was feeding her baby when her husband knocked on the door, demanding water. Seema was terrified, knowing that his demands were never simple. Despite having 3 children, his cruelty had only intensified, and Seema feared what he might do next. Seema felt desperate and determined as she faced yet another night of terror. She decided to fight back with all her might. Despite her husband's brutal actions, trying to force himself on her, hitting her, and even burning her private parts with a cigarette, Seema fought fiercely for her dignity. She used every possible means to defend herself. Her children, still crying, witnessed the horrifying scene. When Seema forcefully pushed her husband away, he threw a brick at her, causing a severe injury to her head. The whole village gathered around, witnessing the distressing event. The humiliation Seema faced in front of her neighbors and the complete disregard for her suffering drove her to make a resolute decision. She realized that no one could help her except herself. At around 10:30 p.m., bleeding and covered in blood-stained clothes, Seema fled from her home. People searched for her, fearing she might harm herself, which would bring shame to her family name. Navigating through her streets, she reached the main road. An auto rickshaw driver, seeing her plight, helped her reach the women's police station. However, when she arrived, only a constable was present, who initially refused to file her report. Seema, desperate and pleading, insisted that her situation was critical and demanded the report be written. Realizing her condition, the constable contacted the inspector, and soon more staff arrived. Seema's report was registered around 12:30 a.m., and she was taken to the hospital. Seema's ordeal continued as her husband was arrested, but he was later released due to his status as a male. The justice system's leniency towards him deeply hurt Seema. Determined not to remain with him any longer, she resolved to take control of her own life. She sought opportunities for herself and her children. With limited resources, she started learning about earning money online through various videos. She realized that freelancing could be a viable option, though she lacked the necessary equipment. With the help of a friend who lent her some money, Seema bought a second-hand computer. She immersed herself in learning how to make money online and even created her own website, although her initial attempts were unsuccessful due to a lack of knowledge. Undeterred, she shifted her focus to creating content for an educational channel. Using her old mobile phone and a makeshift stand made from a broken wiper and a bottle, she began recording her lessons. Seema's channel slowly gained traction. As the lockdown situation eased, she received her first payment of 10,000 rupees, which felt like a fortune to her. Encouraged, she continued working diligently. Her success led to her children's enrollment in an English medium school. Seema managed to balance her household chores, take care of her children, and run her channels, gradually increasing her income from a few thousand to over 1 lakh rupees. Determined to never return to her abusive past, Seema pursued legal action against her husband and continued to grow her online presence. Within a year, her life had transformed. She provided her children with a stable and comfortable environment, giving them the best she could offer. Through relentless effort and unwavering resolve, Seema rebuilt her life from scratch, ensuring a brighter future for her children. Her journey from despair to success stands as a testament to her strength and determination. If you found this story of struggle and triumph inspiring, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and share it with others.